What happens when a king spends more than his kingdom earns on endless parties, palaces, and pointless wars, yet somehow ends up remembered as a hero? By the end of this story, you'll see how Henry VIII's financial chaos still echoes and relates to the world today, and why modern leaders, from politicians to billionaires, use the exact same tricks to divert our attention. Henry VIII's image is burned into history as a flamboyant monarch, a towering Renaissance prince, dazzling in gems and gold, a warrior king, the man who refused to obey the Pope and married 6 times. But behind that glittering facade, the kingdom bled dry. Reckless spending, failed wars, political chaos, religious mayhem, and an England that went from rich and stable to shaky and deep in debt. So how did the son of one of England's most cautious, penny-pinching kings, King Henry VII, blow through a huge royal inheritance and almost bankrupt the country? Let's follow the money. In 1509, Henry VIII took the throne of England with the state finances in excellent shape. His father, King Henry VII, had dragged the country out of the bloody Wars of the Roses and run it like an accountant. Unpopular, but ruthlessly effective. No wasteful wars, no lavishness splurges, just steady taxation, profitable trade, and careful diplomacy. Nothing to be frowned about. Well, except for taxes, of course. When Henry VII died, the royal coffers held more than £1 million, which is worth over £1 billion in today's money. Never before was a bigger stash of gold passed from an English king to his heir. And all of a sudden it sat in the hands of an ambitious 17-year-old who had no intention of playing it safe. At first, England rejoiced. The old, tight-fisted miser of a king was gone. Their young king was everything his father wasn't. He was exciting, athletic, and charming. Henry VIII wanted to be seen as a knight in shining armour, a Renaissance patron, and, above all, a mighty warrior king admired all across Europe. But that image turned out to be quite costly. His first Christmas as king cost £30,000, nearly a whole year of tax revenue. It took 12 days of lavish feasts, ceremonies and banquets with poems, songs, music and dances for his subjects to enjoy. Gold and silver were everywhere, with generous gifts for guests and servants alike. By today's cash, that's about £20 million on a single Christmas. Not just spending the crown's cash, rather burning it, and in style. Henry threw a party that many influencers would be proud of today. And this was just the beginning. Henry had bigger ambitions. He wanted to make England an important political player in Europe. He dreamed of being another Henry V, the conqueror of France. This was more than a dream of military glory. He believed England had a legitimate right to get back its lost French territories. So, in 1511, he joined Spain and the Holy Roman Empire in war against France. He began his own invasion of northern France, and it gave him a chance for the first time to personally lead troops to battle. The result? A victory at the Battle of the Spurs and the capture of Tournai in 1513. Good for propaganda, but utterly useless as a strategic move. And the cost? £960,000, over £500 million today, on an annual income of £100,000. By the end of it, most of his father's stash of gold was gone, and yet Henry was only getting warmed up. After the war, the king and his chief minister, Cardinal Wolsey, tried diplomacy. And so, in 1520, Henry met Francis I of France at the Field of Cloth of Gold near Calais to negotiate peace. True to Henry's character, this turned out not be just a meeting, but rather an extravagant spectacle, with tents made of gold cloth, fountains flowing with wine, feasts, dances and tournaments. And the price tag? A pittance of just around £15 million in today's terms. The peace negotiated there lasted barely 2 years. In 1522, Henry allied with Holy Roman Emperor Charles V in yet another war against France. English troops marched toward Paris to join the imperial army and conquer the city. But alas, the grand meeting never happened. Instead, the soldiers trudged back to Calais, empty-handed but heavily in debt. By 1525, the treasury was completely drained. Henry tried to raise cash with the infamous Amicable Grant, a forced tax which sparked open rebellion because people simply refused to pay. Henry had hit a wall. By 1530, the inflation, called price revolution at the time, was almost 65% compared to 0% in 1510, but he was about to find a new revenue stream. Henry's divorce from Catherine of Aragon is usually told as a story of love, lust, and the king's desperation to have a male heir, but it was also a financial revolution. In 1533, after years of wrangling with Rome, Henry declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, which meant he sent no more church taxes and income to the Pope. But even more importantly, he took control over the church's immense property and resources at home. This wasn't about religious conviction. After all, Henry stayed Catholic in belief for the rest of his life. It was all about the power, control, and, of course, the cash. Henry and his brilliant but ruthless chief minister Thomas Cromwell still needed more cash to fill the empty royal coffers, and so they set their eyes on monasteries. The church owned over a quarter of all cultivated land in England, and its monasteries were extremely wealthy but also very loyal to Rome. And so, from 1536 to 1540, the crown successfully shut them down, seized their gold, silver, jewels, manuscripts, furniture, and livestock. As for the land taken, most of it was sold to the highest bidder, but some of it was kept by the king himself. The haul was worth millions. The dissolution of monasteries, although highly profitable for the king, was a complete social disaster for the country. Monasteries provided education, hospitals, and welfare, and their destruction left thousands of monastery servants jobless and the poor without help. To replace them, Cromwell thought of a poor relief plan, but it was too little too late. The plan was constantly delayed, eventually watered down, and in the end, voted on decades too late. All this led to the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1436, a large-scale uprising in northern England. Although initially met with promises of pardon and reform, the revolt ended with Henry going back on his word, executing its leaders and many followers, and tightening royal control over church and state in the north. And where did all that monastery cash go? Most of it funded wars with France, of course, and some with Scotland, while the rest went to his vanity projects, 50 or so lavish palaces and manors, expensive collections of tapestry, rare armour, jewels, and gifts for a string of wives. To his credit, though, Henry also invested into a project that outlasted him. The Royal Navy, with a mighty fleet of about 50 warships, fortified ports, and dockyards. This first England's standing navy was meant to be defensive only, since he was afraid of an invasion from countries loyal to Rome after his infamous divorce from the Pope. But it laid the foundation for trade and explorations that ultimately allowed England to become a mighty sea power. Still, the spending never stopped. By the 1540s, war returned, and Henry was running out of cash again and had to work out some kind of a quick fix to get his finances back in order. One obvious answer was to find cash abroad, so he turned to Antwerp and started to borrow large sums of money there. Another solution, a much cheaper one, was a multi-staged reduction of silver and gold content in coins while keeping their face value. It was called the Great Debasement, and the profits made from it were used to finance the catastrophic war with Scotland and France. But as the silver wore off and the cheap copper showed through it, all it truly did was earning Henry the nickname Old Copper-Nose. In 1544, he invaded France again, capturing the port town of Boulogne instead of a planned march on Paris, and within a week, a peace deal was signed. Henry kept Boulogne, but the war was a complete financial disaster. The price tag for a 3-month campaign in France in 1544 was almost £600,000, while the total cost of the war of 1542 to 1546 was more than £2 million, or about £2.2 billion in today's money. Inflation more than doubled from 1530 to 1547, hitting almost 150% and sent prices skyrocketing. By the time Henry died in 1547, England had gone from stable and wealthy to politically shaky and financially weakened. he managed to squander the inherited fortune and flip it into £300,000 of foreign debt, plus interest, unpaid wages, loans, and similar costs. Near bankruptcy in just 38 years of his rule. So why isn't Henry remembered as a failure? 2 words: image control. Hans Holbein's portraits projected power and divine blessing. Pamphlets turned defeats into victories. The break with Rome was sold as bold independence. The Navy became a symbol of national pride. The building projects as royal magnificence. And everything bad that ever happened was always blamed on others. Cromwell successfully shaped the king as a wise reformer, not an irresponsible spender. Simply said, Henry knew that if you controlled the story, you controlled your legacy. Henry VIII gave England a new church, the Royal Navy, loads of palaces and a legendary image. But he also left it poorer, more unstable, and buried in debt. In rewriting England's religion and laws, he rewrote his own story and set an example, followed by powerful people and public figures ever since. Control the narrative, dazzle with spectacle, and make the myth louder than the unpleasant truth. Because history tends to remember the crown, not the cost.